Hi there. A little service announcement for you before we get started. Don't worry, this isn't a warning about rude words or gratuitous violence. It's about today's topic. You see, we're talking supply chains, and I don't want that to put you off. You might think it's boring, the stuff of management textbooks and webinars. But I promise, it's fascinating. It involves trade wars, conflict, technology. There's even grey rhinos. No, really. So stick with me on supply chains and supply shocks. This is Reuters Econ World. I'm your host, Carmel Crimmins in Dublin. In economic theory, the impact of supply disruptions on prices depends on how easy it is to find substitutes. Prices go up when you can't find alternatives. COVID showed how difficult that could be, even for things as basic as toilet paper. Why? Because supply chains have become so specialised and interconnected. And manufacturers had a just-in-time approach to inventories, keeping inputs to a minimum to save costs. During COVID, they ditched just-in-time in favour of just-in-case, loading up on supplies. But that approach hasn't lasted, even with a global trade war. That's why when China suspended exports of critical minerals earlier this year, it caused upheaval for a range of manufacturers. So why aren't they reverting to stockpiling? And what does it all mean for future supply shocks? Those are questions Mark Bendeich, Reuters' global managing editor for economics, politics and world news, tried to answer. He went off and did his own deep dive into the world of supply chain management. And he's my guest on today's show. Mark Bendeich, hello. How are you?
Hello. Good. How are you?
I'm grand. I have to confess, Mark, I thought initially that this topic was going to be fierce boring, right? Like supply chains.
Oh,
yeah,
no.
It doesn't really set the pulse racing, does it?
What led you to think that? I mean, really? Oh,
But the more I dug into this, I realised actually this stuff, it's fascinating. Like supply chains, they're the arteries of the modern economy, that they're at the heart of everything. So I take it all back. Supply chains are super interesting.
well, it's interesting you say that because one of the people I interviewed is a guy called Ben Farrell, and he's the chief executive of what's known as the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. Riveting stuff. But he has a very long history in supply chains. And he said to me, and I quote, "Never in history can we say that global supply has been more important in defining the success of nations." Now, that's a big call, right?
Yeah.
But actually, when you think about it, we've had some really dramatic supply shocks. Obviously, world wars, the Arab oil embargo of the United States in the early 70s sent inflation through the roof. But probably, and I think this is Ben Farrell's point, is that never before have we seen supply chains so intricately and tightly interwoven as we see today after decades of globalization. The stakes are incredibly high now, even though the supply shocks, we've seen tariff debates and tariff wars before. We've seen them a century ago and even longer. But the stakes are so much higher in an unprecedented way right now because of supply chains, how far they stretch. Supply chains can involve hundreds, if not thousands, of suppliers, all kind of harmonized and intricately balanced.
Taking a look back, supply chains have obviously been around for a long time, and I think the oldest global supply chain is considered to be the Silk Road. But sticking to more recent times, and something I think that's really relevant for our conversation today, is the evolution of just-in-time supply chain management, right? That pre-COVID, that kind of just-in-time mentality, that's what ruled the roost, didn't it, for supply chains?
It did. It came from Toyota, really, this fabled manufacturer from Japan. But really, it was a whole new manufacturing and philosophy. But of course, it really caught on because essentially it's efficient. So you only really have to hold optimum levels of inventory, but you have to act really quickly. You have to be nimble to make sure it all works, that you don't have one snag that brings the whole thing to a shuddering halt. So they perfected this. And of course, it really caught on because the larger the inventory you carry, the greater your cost of goods sold, which means the impact on your margins and profits are greater.
Right.
So if you can manage your inventory down, you can be a more successful company financially. So that was the thing. And then that actually was perfected and perfected to the point where actually when it met COVID, it came to a shuddering halt.
The big game changer was COVID, right?
Oh, totally. COVID was a once in a generation, if not generations, event. And it's,
Here's hoping.
I'm knocking wood as I'm saying this.
Touch wood, yeah.
But yeah, it seems like a long time ago, doesn't it? But remember, there were shortages of everything. There were empty supermarket shelves. Couldn't buy a car.
Yep.
You'd have to put what you were on waiting lists to get a car.
Buy a car, Mark. You couldn't get toilet roll.
Toilet roll.
Like there was far more fundamental issues at play, right? Like let's just forget about the combustion engine, right?
That's a whole different podcast series is the toilet roll.
Yes.
But yeah, it was the doozy. And I think that's the thing that really woke people up to just in time. Just in time was developed for a different kind of world.
It led to some fundamental questions about economic security, didn't it? Like the US really woke up to its reliance on China.
Absolutely. And so we saw a whole bunch of export restrictions come on from the United States in terms of chip exports to China, from China in terms of rare earths and other mineral exports. So there was a lot of kind of resource nationalism going on. There was a lot of nearshoring, friendshoring, call it what you like.
Right.
But essentially it was as kind of a reversal of what we'd seen in the previous decades when globalization was the mantra.
So during the pandemic, manufacturers moved away from the kind of just-in-time sort of supply chain management, right, to the kind of just-in-case type, which is basically, I have the fear, I need to have lots of supplies, right?
Yeah.
Building up stocks of inventory, renting out warehouse space.
And look, it was needs must, so they had to do this. They had to get their hands on anything they could and make sure that they could continue to trade. I think that was kind of the thinking at the time. But of course, interest rates back then, immediately after COVID came down, so finance was cheaper. So you're running high inventories, but actually your financing costs for those industries is a little bit cheaper.
Right.
And then
and demand is there, right? People are online shopping.
Absolutely. And so, but it wasn't a long-term thing because the fundamental problem with running big inventories, there are several, but two big ones are obviously the financing cost. And the second one is obsolescence. So if you hold something long enough, then you might find that you can never sell it. It's been superseded. And interestingly, Samsung Electronics wrote down a very significant amount of its inventory in the latest quarterly results. And it said it was because of US export restrictions of AI type chips that essentially meant that the stuff sitting on the shelves in its warehouses were becoming obsolete, so they wrote them off. So, those are two very big risks, and they might seem prudent in a crisis for sure. But once the crisis ebbs, then, and particularly once interest rates start to go up, you really have to look at your bottom line.
Okay, quiz time. And here's one for all the econ nerds out there. So, according to Economics 101, supply increases as the price rises, and demand increases when the price falls. But there are some exceptions to this rule. Like, for example, luxury goods, for which demand increases in line with their price. In economics, what are those goods called? Are they A, Giffen goods, B, Veblen goods, or C, private goods? We'll have the answer for you at the end of the show. Up next, we hear about the role of AI in helping manufacturers navigate supply shocks. So Mark, COVID is over, but things haven't exactly returned to normal for companies. Like, we've a lot of geopolitical stuff going on. We've got war very much still raging in Ukraine. We've the conflict in the Middle East, cyber attacks, Houthi attacks on ships in the Red Sea, and a full-blown trade war between the US and China. So from a sort of layman's perspective, Mark, I'd be expecting that producers around the world would be keeping stocks high because, there's a whole range of risks that they're having to navigate. But that's not the case, right?
Yeah. Well, It has been a bit erratic lately because during that uncertain period when the tariff wars was like, oh, it's going to be 50% one day. No, it's back to 15. No, we could get, it was sort of changing.
Yeah.
A lot of uncertainty. And there were deadlines given, it's going to take effect on this date. And then it was delayed. So actually, people, particularly in the US, brought a lot of stock onshore. So that had a lot of noise in the inventory levels. So you suddenly saw people, they were actually sort of stacking things to the rafters, metaphorically speaking. But that was just a short-term thing caused by this uncertainty and this forever moving deadline.
Right.
Now things have settled down somewhat. And overall, if you take out the noise, inventory levels are significantly lower than they were, let's say, in the first year or two after COVID, for sure. In fact, the numbers show that inventories have been trending down sharply since about late 2022, 2023, right across industries, in fact.
That's extraordinary. I mean, isn't it risky?
Yeah. Look, I think that decision from China to restrict rare earths, which has since been unwound somewhat, that was the thing that got me thinking about it. It was just something, just an ordinary news call that we were having, and we were talking about the story of the day, which was China's decision to restrict rare earth exports. And actually, in the days after that, very quickly that fed through to disruption to manufacturers and particularly to car makers and people who need these big industrial magnets that really rely on rare earth supplies. And of course, China absolutely dominates the supply of rare earths. And it just struck me like, how does that happen? We've had 5 years of really quite dramatic supply disruptions. How is it that an industry that's been through all of them has been caught so flat-footed on what was a fairly predictable outcome, i.e. China would restrict rare earths.
Right.
They did it a decade ago against Japan. The US had been putting a fairly hard chip embargo on China, and it had been widely speculated that one of the things that China could do would be retaliate with rare earths. So it happens, and we're not surprised in the newsroom, but it seems the whole manufacturing industry is kind of caught flat-footed. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but it was true. We saw immediate supply shortages. So that got me thinking, well, why is that so? I mean, that just seems really dumb.
Right.
And actually, then when you get into it, you find out that there are real reasons for that.
So tell us about that. What are the reasons for it? Like, how is it that they were apparently caught flat-footed?
Well, one, you can't really afford in this day and age as interest rates, because interest rates have been on a journey, right? So in COVID, it was pretty cheap to finance inventory and a whole lot of other things.
Right.
Then interest rates started to rise. Remember, we had all the supply shortage. We had a lot of inflation and interest rates went up. And it was around that time that it became quite expensive to sit on large amounts of inventory. And also, there's the question of obsolescence as well, because you can be sitting on a large amount of stock that you may never be able to sell in future because it's just been superseded. It's last year's model or whatever. So that was one of the reasons why, inventory started to come down, even despite Ukraine war, Red Sea conflict, trade wars, export restrictions left, right and centre. And another reason was actually, this I found it particularly interesting, was the use of AI. It came along at exactly the right time. Here was industries that were really looking for ways in which they can manage this chaos. And AI is taking off in supply chains, like really taking off.
So talk to us about that, but maybe take a step back and tell us, first of all, about the people that you had to speak to find out what was going on.
Like a lot of things, there's always a person at the end of it. Like supply chains, we talk about it as though it's this sort of mythical beast that stretches across the world and involves millions of people. But there are these people called supply chain managers who actually have to deal with this stuff that we talk about in kind of sometimes esoteric terms with economists and policy experts. But there's someone flying by the seat of their pants. I really mean by the seat of their pants now. And look, these people really came out of the shadows, I think, ever since COVID.
Yeah.
I was told board members, even CEOs, chairs of the board wouldn't be able to tell you much about supply chains, writ large, yes, but they couldn't dive down in the detail. And then ever since COVID, they've had to really get down in the detail. And there has been a push to get more supply chain managers onto the board or more supply chain experience onto the board. because suddenly these decisions that people were making in the bowels of an organization, in front of a whiteboard,
Yeah.
they're actually having a big impact on the companies. What do you mean we haven't got any widgets to, what do you mean we have to shut down our production? So, yeah, supply chain managers have kind of found their time in the sun.
I mean, these people have to live 3 months, 6 months, a year in advance, right? Depending on the industry they're in. They have to kind of live in the future and sort of game out what's going to happen.
And it can come from any direction.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be a Trump tweet, or it could be that the sponsor of your product has just tweeted something completely outrageous.
Right.
And you've got a problem on your hands. What do you do with, these sneakers or whatever that you've got sitting in the wet?
Yeah.
So, yeah, these people really are kind of on the front line. They are on the coalface of this, having to make real decisions involving real money, which have real consequences for the bottom lines of their organizations, which stretch from small, medium, and very large multinationals.
So you're saying that despite everything that's going on, inventory levels are now kind of back at pre-pandemic levels. And it seems like there's two reasons for that. One, it's just the cost of keeping large stocks. It's just too expensive. And the second thing is the role of AI, right?
Well, the role of AI, that came on at just the right time. So, Carmel, that was told barely a year ago, maybe just, I say 18 months ago. People weren't talking about AI in supply chain management. It's just come on at a time when they are looking for a tool which enables them to manage supply chains efficiently in all this chaos.
Right.
And then AI comes along. And I spoke to one supply chain manager. It can be quite simple as for instance, when he goes to bed, there's a whole lot happening, which in the morning he needs to try and make sense of. And that could be another tweet on tariffs. It could be another restriction of exports. It could be another ship being sunk by the Houthis or whatever it happens to be. So, or it could be something like the weather. So this person I spoke to has a podcast that AI puts together for him in the morning, and he will listen to that podcast and that will help inform him. And then he has a team that will use AI in kind of, I think, cleverer ways. And they will have what's called agentic AI, where AI will analyze all the data on demand, historic trends, real-time demand signals, political things that might be going on. And then at the end of the day, it'll actually say to you, I think you should buy 1,000 tons of this tomorrow. And then you just press OK.
Right.
I mean, that's an exaggeration. No, it's sort of simplification, but it's not much. I mean, these tools are now basically to the extent where I'm told consultants say that they're already starting to make some mundane decisions behind the scenes. You can override them, of course, but that leaves you more time as a supply chain manager to look at some of the more strategic things that you might want to do. So like friendshoring, nearshoring, should I move this to Vietnam? Do I move this to India? Do I take it onto the United States and so on?
So who's dominating this space then? Like, who offers this supply chain software?
Well, it's kind of the usual suspects and a couple of others. So out in front is SAP. It's a very big software company that obviously has been in supply chain management for a very, very long time. You've got Oracle, another big consultant, and then you've got Coupa, another American company along with Oracle, Microsoft, and then a company called Blue Yonder, which is actually owned by Panasonic. So those are the big five.
Is there a lot of hype around this, Mark?
I was told by a number of consultants that money is going to be spent and going to be wasted on kind of false hopes for AI. And sort of the serious implementers of AI, what they tend to be doing is taking on a pilot, having it running a few test cases through, and they might spend a few million at that stage. And then, you might get to particularly the big companies where you're spending tens of millions on AI, but AI will be integrated as part of the product and will become a very large part of supply chain management software. It's not like an add-on. It's just the new way of doing this. So yeah, it'll be interesting. Some people will waste a lot of money, I'm told, on this, just like they will with AI and various other industries.
Right.
But it is actually a game changer. No one is disabusing me of that notion.
If you're interested in hearing more about how big business is navigating Trump's tariffs, check out this week's episode of the Big View podcast. Reuters Breaking Views columnist Katrina Hamlin speaks to Jeremy Papin, the chief financial officer of Nissan, Here's a snippet of what he had to say.
We just set up the right information flows, cooperation with the supply base, cooperation with the dealers. That's the name of the game.
I've put a link to that show in the description of today's episode. You can also find it on the Reuters app. Just go to Media, Podcasts, and search for The Big View, or find it on your preferred podcast platform. So, Mark, I suppose the big headline for me is that there aren't big stockpiles sitting out there in warehouses around the world to cushion the global economy in case of a supply shock, right?
No. I mean, you could always find a particular supplier that might be running high inventory for whatever reason or other. But if you're looking across manufacturing, and the ISM manufacturing PMIs, they do an inventory subset of that.
Yeah.
That shows quite clearly that there is a lot of noise. But if you look at it, the trend is clear. You had pre-COVID, then you had COVID, and then you're back to something similar to pre-COVID, but with a lot more noise.
I don't know, for me, like, it just seems, as I say, as a layperson, it seems extraordinary.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the reason I kind of got interested in it in the first place, because it does seem counterintuitive, frankly.
Right.
But this is such a science now. This is the thing, and a kind of real-time science, thanks partly in recent times to AI, that there is a philosophy, I think, that, look, if it really, really, you have like have a bit of world war, some massive type like COVID type shock again, there's a limit to what you can do, even if you were running pretty generous inventories, right? So the thing is, there are those black swan events, and then there were this. He described it once, his consultant, as a grey rhino event.
What's that?
Which is, well, apparently it's when you kind of know something is possible. It's sort of there in a fuzzy outline on the horizon.
Right.
But then all of a sudden it comes charging at you at a rate of knots. And that's kind of like, well, I could sort of understand that might happen one day and it might hit me hard, but I don't know when and I don't know how hard. And this is where the area where AI might be able to help, depending on how hard and how fast this event charges at you. Then there's the black swan, which is a bit like COVID. Like, really, I mean, who isn't impacted by COVID? It's going to hit us as, I can't run inventory on really generous levels forever on the basis that one day I'm going to get clobbered by this black swan.
Right.
But your grey rhinos, I think I'm clever enough with a bit of AI to kind of keep an eye on it, see how fast it's approaching, and then maybe if I'm nimble enough and fast enough, I can react to it, and I'll still be affected, but hopefully I'll still be in good shape at the end of it. That's how it was described to me in those two scenarios,
Right, because imposing restrictions on exports of rare earth minerals sounds like a grey rhino event.
It is. That's your grey rhino right there, Carmel.
But they didn't cater for it, though.
That's the surprising bit. And I don't have an answer for why the magnets, I don't know whether they're just so expensive and these are the things you don't keep spares of. I don't really know, but that it is a bit frustrating for me, as that was the entry point for the whole thing. Samsung, to me, gave me a bit of a eye-opener in the sense that the obsolescence thing is real. Like, that was a really significant write-down Samsung made.
Yeah.
So to have something on the shelf and then to write it down to zero, or significantly anyway, that's a big deal too. So there are risks on both sides, I guess, with this just in time. Over the long run, you're going to make more profits and you're going to have a much more efficient and responsive supply chain. Though in the short run, sometimes you're going to get caught flat-footed. That was my read from talking to consultants and supply chain managers and so on.
Which sectors are running a really tight ship, like with lean stocks?
So if you're supplying things that will go through Amazon or Tmall or what are those big platforms, maybe fast fashion, the traditional things, that's where you really can get caught short with things like obsolescence, stock that you can't move or you have to radically discount. So for those industries in particular, and I was told by one consultant that this is an industry that is really thinking through AI and embracing it, perhaps more than other industries.
Regular listeners to the show know there's a weekly newsletter to accompany it called Reuters Econ World. But did you know that Reuters has a whole universe of newsletters covering everything from the day's top news to AI and US politics? We've even got one focused on ideas to global crises called Beacon. You can find all of them on the Reuters app. Just go to Menu and Newsletters. Stick around for the final part of the show to hear why black swans and grey rhinos are here to stay. Mark, a major part of all of this is China's role in the supply chain. We've all learned very clearly that China plays a crucial role, and the US administration, both the current one and the previous one, were trying to reduce China's prominence in the supply chain. How are supply chain managers dealing with that?
So that's interesting. It does depend a little bit industry by industry, but what we're finding is that some things are moving to the kind of China plus one countries, like, for example, Vietnam, for instance. Some things are moving back to the US. So a lot of US manufacturers are able to move production back. And one I spoke to said some of their production would come back, but they're very precise about what makes sense to come back and what doesn't.
Right.
The really interesting thing, and I guess this is no surprise to your listeners, but that China is not just a place where is a really central place in your supply chain because it might be cheaper. It's actually a bit like Japan and Toyota, to get back to that. It's because they are such superb manufacturers. They do it so well.
Right.
So that's another sticky thing about supply chains in China, and a very interesting kind of counterweight to the natural inclination just from tariffs to go looking for a country that isn't going to attract the kind of tariff that China is from the US, I mean.
So the bottom line is we're still very much at risk of supply shocks, right? Like, despite everything that happened with COVID, it just doesn't make sense for companies to stockpile. So supply shocks are still a big risk out there, like a black swan.
Exactly.
As it were.
Exactly. But we're not turning the clock back to the era before just in time. From what I understand, that really is, I thought during the initial stage of COVID, that's maybe where we're going. We're going into more nationalist kind of shorter supply chains, just in case mentality was here to stay.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's clearly not.
So at the end of your reporting, having delved into the world of supply chain management, how does it leave you feeling about kind of like the global economy, the risk, navigating a trade war?
Well, I think we're kind of where we were at the beginning. I think the COVID was absolutely massive, but because it was so outsized and so out of the blue and so extraordinary, that you can't frame policy around that. Otherwise, we'd all be driving armored cars just on just in case there was a drive-by or what. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
But I guess to stretch that metaphor a bit, yes, we're looking to road safety. We're going to do as much as we can, but we still need to get to A to B. We need to do it quickly. We need to do it efficiently. So that's the kind of thing I drew from the reporting, that we're in a very interesting place where supply chain management doesn't look the same. I don't know there are going to be many whiteboards out there. There's a lot of AI. It's coming very, very fast. There's some new people involved in it. There's a lot of money being invested in the kind of tools that you need to be able to sift an ocean of data in real time and take into historical trends and then come up with something as banal as buy 1,000 tons.
A big thank you to Mark for his time and his insights. I've put a link to his story in today's show notes. As for our quiz, the question was, what is the term in economics for luxury goods for which demand increases in line with their price? Was it A, Giffen goods, B, Veblen goods, or C, private goods? And the answer is B, Veblen goods. This is Reuters Econ World. Every week we go deep on the economic principles and ideas driving the biggest news around the world. If you want to tell us what you thought of this week's show, drop us a line in the comments section of your favourite podcast platform. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. Sound design, music composition and engineering on this episode was by Seb Summer. Our podcast team includes Kim Vanell, Josh Summer, Tara Oakes, Gail Issa, Christopher Waljasper, Jonah Green, David Spencer, Abisoye Adelusi and Sharon Reich Garson. Our executive producer is Leela de Kretzer. Remember, for all your daily news, check out our weekday show, Reuters World News. You can catch it on the Reuters app or wherever you listen to your podcasts.